So, Daniel,
Yeah.
thank you very much for having us along here for the 6th year running. Very much appreciate it.
Great.
And give us a little background as to what we're going to do. We're going to try and cover some of the things that I think are important with Microsoft, what they're doing in the entrepreneurial world. And we would like some questions from the audience if you get the opportunity. Don't be shy. It's only being broadcast to millions of people across the internet live, so there's just no pressure on you. Please do give us some questions. Well, let's start a little bit with Daniel. Tell us a bit about your background and what you do for Microsoft.
Okay. Well, I've been here working in Silicon Valley since 1976, so I've seen some of the movie and participated in some of it along the way. Some know that I kind of grew up in the early days at Apple, spent my tenure there working on the Mac, and then I was part of the team that left Apple and started Next. Then I did some startup work in the mobile and pen-based computing area in 1990-ish with Kleiner Perkins financing. Did some consulting work for Apple and IBM's boards when they were doing some joint ventures in the early mid-90s for 2 years. Worked with the venture community and the startup community in a couple of areas. The last thing I did before I came to Microsoft was to run a startup company that was kind of from scratch, focused on mapping intellectual property assets to business strategy, just at a time when XML was sort of on the verge, and the idea of understanding how patent and related assets could be aligned to your business P&Ls in a time when, in the mid-late 90s,
Yep.
when intangible assets were surfacing, and people probably remember sort of the Amazon one-click patent and things like that bubbled up in that period. So most of my background before coming to Microsoft was obviously not at Microsoft and in many ways competing with Microsoft. But for the last 10 solid years, a little more than 10 years, I've been here on the campus where we now have about 2,500 people and growing, given the pending Skype acquisition. What I look after here is everything we do that emanates, basically this is industry headquarters, right? And our headquarters is in the Seattle area. So in that sense, I get to, as an officer of the company, I get to sort of be like the sixth person on the basketball team in some ways as a proxy for industry issues that happen down here where it's important for us to be at the table. And those can be things related to policy issues when it's government related, security privacy issues, things like that, where policy tends to emanate from people who live and work in Silicon Valley, even if it's federal government issues. So I have that as maybe 20% of what I do, looking after what we have as a company, including events like this, if you will, where we are very interested in participating in the community and in the ecosystem and making our facilities available in a partnership kind of way. We do 150 style events like this, not as nice as this one, if you will, because this is a special one, but I would say. But we partner with others. And then where we have like minds and similar interests. Yeah. So that's sort of a 20% area of responsibility. That I would also add includes our community giving and outreach. And for those who don't know, this is by far the most generous company in terms of an employee base in the industry and frankly in the world, stemming from Bill Gates' original supposition that for those that good things happen to, you should do good things, and that sort of emanated from his mother pushing on him as a young man. My business, above and beyond that, is tied to venture capital and startups, emanating, again, from here, but also all around the world. There's 10 or 20 places, special places around the world where the likes of Silicon Valley best practices happen, whether it's in Tel Aviv or in Cambridge or in Beijing last week, and you pick your spot. There's maybe 20 around the world, and so we have a team of people here in the Valley that pay attention to the patterns of behavior. Where is the money flowing? Where are the entrepreneurs behaving and doing interesting things? And how does that relate to what we care about and where we can be helpful? So again, that's at sort of a more intimate level, or knowing people by name level. At a scale level, I also look after other programs where we make our tools and technology available to startup companies everywhere in the world. For the last 2 years, we've had this program called BizSpark in the market, where there are now over 40,000 companies who have passed a filter, which includes getting a token from someone, either a Microsoft employee or the likes of the folks who were on stage a moment ago, venture capitalists, tech transfer offices and universities, small business administration of the government of some country in Middle East Africa, if you will, or that whole ecosystem development where people can bet on our technology is something that we've normalized around this program called BizSpark, where we meet the market on its terms. In other words, you don't pay for our stuff for 3 full years. You can use any volume that you want, and then you pay naturally for maintenance fees over time like you would as you scale your business. So it's our investment, if you will, as opposed to cash investment in the startup ecosystem. Again, it starts here, but it goes everywhere in the world. So that's kind of the portfolio of things that I look after. It's a great seat, and you can dive into it as you see fit.
Okay, so thanks for setting the scene on that. Appreciate that. Now, Microsoft has been in the press a little bit recently, and I'd like to touch on some of those, because some of it's been, good stuff, and some of it's a little controversial. So let's start with the good stuff first, which is Skype.
Sure.
What was that all about? What are you going to do with it? This is a very intimate little conversation we're having here.
Yeah,
so you
absolutely.
Can tell us,
Well, it's pending approval, but we think there's great opportunity to involve Skype and their technology and their customer base into the broader capabilities of the net over time. As people were just commenting on the last panel, I don't think we're entering a bubble phase at all. I think we're entering the rapid scale-out phase, and there's a framework for that that is very well normalized in and around the web, appropriate standards for interoperability, and this ubiquitous connectivity. 10 years ago, when I started here, I could recall, I did this for years, asking people in forums like this, where's the edge of the network? And you get people to sort of speak up, and they go, well, maybe it's at your desktop, or hotspots really didn't exist. Nobody really had high performance networking in their pocket. Although everybody had a cell phone, they weren't smartphones, right? So we're at a stage now where ubiquitous connectivity begets low-level horizontal capabilities that everyone wants to use for interesting new things, and communications is a central element of that. So that's the interest we have. I wish I could give you more, but it's still pending regulator approval.
Okay, that was a very long answer to tell us not an awful lot, really.
There you go.
Yeah, very good, very good. So something else that's been interesting in the blogs, and I really would like to comment on that, there's been lots of comments and blogs in the press about a comment from Steve Blank recently, which was that Microsoft is the living dead. What's it like to be a zombie?
Yeah, there you go. Hey, it's popular on TV, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Microsoft is far from, I would say, living dead. This company has an incredible framework of assets, not the least of which is its existing businesses. There's nothing that you could see in any of the numbers, if you just look at the numbers,
right,
that would suggest that our core businesses are anything but reasonably healthy. Various levels of health, but 15 years ago there was no server and tools business inside of Microsoft. It was nascent. There was a server offering, but there effectively was no server and tools business. 10 years later, this is a $15 billion business. There have been, don't quote me on this in terms of specifics, but there have been approximately 30 plus, maybe 50, I don't know the numbers exactly, billion-dollar software companies in the world. There are about 15 billion-dollar software companies inside of this company, and they're growing. So there's no shortage of opportunity. It's kind of like saying the mainframe is dead and it's a living dead. It's a growth business for IBM. It prints most of their profits. They haven't gone away. They've morphed their business, and they've moved their model. You're seeing us invest very heavily in new businesses, and there are some very, very good ones that are blossoming, including what's going on with Xbox, what will be going on with big screens, if you will, television associated with that, how people will interact with those systems and devices. There's a lot going on there. I think I'm sure you'll ask me a question about Steve as it relates to that as well.
Yes,
but,
yes,
you
that's
know,
one of the ones.
let me quote our CEO. We missed a cycle on mobile. I mean, that was glaringly obvious, but we're coming back, and we're coming back strong in mobile. It'll take a little time. But again, that's an interesting business where people do turn, based upon the business model of mobile devices, people turn them over reasonably frequently. And so there's a real opportunity for us, I'd say, to be in that game as well. So I feel actually quite good about it. I think there are areas where we could be executing better, and that's, you know, the analysts and the pundits all have points of view on that. But there are a few companies on the planet that grow in terms of general profits and gross revenues at the scale that this one's been growing for the last 10 years. So,
okay, they're pretty good. So is Steve Blank still welcome on the campus? Or?
I like Steve Blank a lot, and in fact, I talk to him on a reasonable basis. He is a very, 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 very smart guy, and he, far from being, it's always better to be lucky than good, but that guy's good. And in terms of his assessment of how to think about markets and approach them and build companies and stuff. And it's terrific that he's giving back and doing as much as he is in terms of lecturing and teaching and things like that, and codifying his principles, because there aren't that many people like him. So I'm sure his point of view, and I haven't talked to him about that specifically, I'd be happy to do that. You know, from our standpoint, there are areas where we can improve, but I also think there are areas, particularly in the last 18 to 24 months, where we've been executing quite well. Phone architecture coming, what we're doing with Xbox Natural Interface, what we're doing with Azure and our cloud services, all very exciting. And then how many people saw the Windows 8 thing just the other day? You can
Windows
see it
8?
online as well. So I think, or Windows, codename Windows 8, whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Steve Ballmer. He's been mentioned a little bit in the press recently. There's been some questions about the Microsoft stock performance, and maybe it's time for Steve to move along. That's probably going to be a pretty difficult question to respond to, but lob it across, see what you think.
Well, it's been in the press, right? So it's a fair question. It would be hard for me to imagine. I have different vantage point than anyone in the press, and certainly than anyone in the room. Analysts study the company, they look at the financials, they look at the market context within which we operate, and things like that. Microsoft is an amazing company in the sense that it, for 25 years, executed very, very well, and also was the beneficiary of people fumbling, right? I mean, the whole history of Silicon Valley and companies that have been very successful in Silicon Valley, whether it's the productization of TCP/IP and what became 3Com, or whether it's the failure at Xerox associated with Interpress, which effectively became Adobe, and what happened with laser printers. So there have always been these dynamics in the industry that people have capitalized on, both because they're prescient and smart, and they have a vision, and they have the ability to hire really bright people and execute on a new model. And Microsoft, again, given my history, which you asked about and I described, I spent 25 years of my life in business life primarily competing with Microsoft. And at the end of the day, their execution over time accumulated to this incredible institution, which built these broad horizontal layers upon which incredible things happened. I had friends in the sort of the early mid-90s who were implementing TCP/IP stacks behind corporate firewalls for large enterprises in Silicon Valley, making multiple millions of dollars a year in profit to them because they knew how to do it in their sleep, but they bid these 90-day contracts. And then TCP/IP got built into the operating system. So all those companies went away, but you had a new layer of capability that was network-based PCs, which no one anticipated would include the use of an open network, because all the network's proprietary, lands inside of corporate firewalls. And then CommerceNet clicked, and Al Gore didn't invent the internet, but he put the legislation in place to allow commercial things to happen on the internet. So lo and behold, play catch up, security problems, all those kinds of things. So the whole ecosystem play out for the first 25 years of the microprocessor. Microsoft was a major leader in execution and beneficiary of other people's foibles in many ways. So here we sit now, I think, in an opportunity space which is very much multidimensional as opposed to client-server, which was what the first 25 years were all about. And that was just the fracturing of the application logic, going to the client side and the data tier sitting on the server. And that was, taking the mainframe and splitting it apart. So now it's a very multifaceted problem. And to maintain presence in all the different facets for a company of our size and scale to continue the growth, given the law of large numbers and how big our base is, there's a lot of bets being placed. So back to Steve. I don't know anyone better on the planet, given what he's faced with, to make the decisions that are being made about where we should invest.
Okay.
And that's his job. At the end of the day, he's got to rely on execution of the team and the people. And, I think he's done a very good job, personal opinions, right, at this stage. But I think he's done a very good job of tapping key leaders and pulling key leaders in from outside the company. Chi Lu, Don Matrick, Stephen Elop, who's now moved on at Nokia, exactly. So I think the company has the capability, and now it boils down to our ability to focus and execute and get things done. And I think we're on a really good track for that.
Okay. I've got a bunch more questions for Daniel here, but I wanted to, he's obviously being very open with us and treating this as quite an intimate gathering. Anybody have any questions for Daniel? Yes, there's a question there, sir.
You mentioned you missed the mobile wave. Would you like to comment on where your partnership with Nokia is, and is the phone coming out later this year?
Sure. I'll leave it to, the question was related to our current situation in the phone and what we're doing with Nokia. Nokia should speak for themselves relative to when they launch their devices, but they have stated publicly that they expect there'll be devices in market this calendar year, so you'll assume the latter part of the year, but that they will come to market next calendar year. And when Nokia, for those who aren't aware, I think people are probably generally aware, but if this is a US-centric audience, I'll point out to those who aren't as conscious of it, they are a very, very big market presence outside of the U.S. in certain key markets, large markets in particular, whether it's India or China or Turkey or other markets where mobile is very, very big. They are the lion's share leader. For the types of devices, you could argue about what a smartphone is in terms of the underlying software and marketplace capabilities, which is, I think, what everybody thinks about today when you think about a smartphone. It's a device that you can run apps on and that you can easily get apps to, and it has to have some other capability, browsing the web, things of that ilk. So if you separate that capability from the underlying cost of the device, so in other words, what's the bill of materials and how much does it cost to build a device that is that capable? Nokia sells more than 100 million units a year at that price point of device. And so they've made a commitment to bet on our environment, Windows 7 phone environment, for that class of device. So you can look at the analyst reports and their comments about their share and their trends, et cetera, but you can, I think, look reasonably closely at that and say, on a global basis, once they enter the market, that the volume that will go into the market is quite high. And that will turn into, I think, a terrific ecosystem for the developer community, where we've been doing reasonably well so far. I don't know the exact numbers, it's 15,000-ish or something like that applications. Most of the major ones, there's certainly less than 100 or so that are kind of must-have that we're working on that we're confident we'll have running on the platform pretty soon. So we think we'll be in the game pretty soon. You may not see it as immediately in the U.S. market as you will in other places around the world, but make no mistake, we're both very committed to this market and in the long run to this device architecture.
Okay. Any more questions from the audience? You're a very quiet audience.
Yeah,
I have to say.
not enough coffee.
Yeah. No, okay, it's a question in the back there. Yes, sir, shout.
Why is it taking so long for Microsoft to move big Windows to the ARM architecture? And do you think it's quick enough to get back to the tablet game?
Did you get that?
What was the first part of the question? I got the point about ARM and getting back in the tablet game.
Why did it take so long? Because I understand the internal prototypes were looking.
Yeah. We have a commitment to our installed base.
Could you just repeat the
Yeah,
question?
okay, so the core question was, why is it taking so long for us to get into the tablet game? And given the recent public displays of the Windows 8 quote-unquote interface running on ARM and Intel, why is it taking us so long to do those kinds of things? We spent a little period of time in the middle part of this decade working on Vista. We got a little behind on that, I would say, and with Windows 7 entering the market, I'd say extremely successfully. Huge numbers of devices. It's more than half the machines around the internet are running Windows 7 now, et cetera, et cetera. So Windows 7, I think, is a very sound and terrific baseline. Given the scale, to my earlier little comment about commitment to the installed base, we have a very strong belief system, a very large customer base that thinks about managing these systems. So systems management, enterprise infrastructure, all those kinds of things. We will be in market if you do look at the crystal ball and just say, okay, what happened in the past is a reasonable indicator of what our forward-looking timelines will be. Analysts have speculated, we've made the point about having a developer conference later this year, and then typically we enter a beta phase, and then within 12 months we're in the market. So let's make that assumption. If you were to rewind and look at when the planning started for what you saw just the other day online, all of that planning and intent and interface work and design work was done before the iPad hit the market. So we knew where we were going. We just got to get there faster. And so we're executing as fast as we can. I think it's, by all accounts, the right strategy. That's both a statement about phones and tablets being more or less the same thing. I think tablets are big phones, more or less. And I think they will want, over time, some of the capabilities that PC architectures have. They want the security, they want the manageability, especially if you're an enterprise buying large volumes of those things. And then I think consumers over time want to know about those things as well. So in many cases, the phone is this funny device that you buy, but your employer pays the service fee for and stuff. So phones were kind of the proxy for the way these mobile useful devices will play out. And I think our approach with the tablet play being based on PC architecture rather than phone architecture, I think it's the right one, and I think it'll just be a race once we get in the market. Clearly there'll be a great install base of iPads and other tablet devices, but it'll be incumbent upon us and our hardware partners and others to prove those form factors and use cases out, and the battle will be on in the market for what the consumers want to use.
Terrific. I'm going to change tack a little bit. I don't know if I know we have a lot of people from overseas here today. So I want to talk about Silicon Valley in the global view. So Silicon Valley has the highest concentration of entrepreneurs and venture capital in the world. Mm-hmm. It accounts for probably 30% or more of global venture capital. Mm-hmm. You have a view, you have the opportunity to go around the rest of the world. What do you think is going to happen in Silicon Valley? Is Silicon Valley going to get stronger, do more stuff, going to be bigger, or is it going to be happening in other places around the world? And is Silicon Valley going to become less relevant?
I do travel around a lot and visit most of the places in the world where this style of investment is done. I don't see any fundamental sort of degradation in the Silicon Valley position, but I do see the rise of others. And
talk to that a little bit. Yeah.
In that sense, it's a little bit like the U.S. Sort of this level of complaint that people in the U.S. have about this is broken or that's broken or what have you. Just because others are doing well doesn't mean that things are so broken here. And just because there's venture capital being deployed elsewhere in the world doesn't mean that Silicon Valley is going to recede and fade away and become the quote-unquote Detroit, right, of what happened in the auto industry. I mean, the auto industry was all about, in the early days, about metal bending, and 70% of the manufacturing and related jobs and businesses within the United States was within a 500-mile radius of Detroit. And why was that? It's because you could drive a truck there overnight, and the parts could be there in the morning. And so we live in a very different world where the network removes the distance and bits can move anywhere. The interesting issues in the future will be the regulatory regimes and the nation states' views on the data, the information flow, the privacy, the security, and the right issues. So what I see is this interesting dynamic around the world where nation states are trying to figure that out. If you don't have rules and regs, you won't have data sitting in your sovereign state. That's the big fundamental issue in China, and witness what happened with Yahoo and Jerry Yang having to go before Congress and all those things. So there's this regime change, and a lot of it's going to be the legal and regulatory framework when data can just be everywhere. But I'm very bullish on Silicon Valley. It starts with the weather. Let's get real. It starts with the weather. It's and that's good. Stanford's not going away, right? The high concentration of people who are willing to bet are here. I mean, even when you go to Boston, it's or any other part of the world, people. It's like, will the lawyers give you their time in advance of a financing and not expect payment until you get a financing? Simple. In Valley, do it all the time. In Boston, maybe, maybe not. I'm making that up just as an extreme, but those are the kinds of things. Who will bet? So what is the ecosystem? What is the trust framework? And it comes from proximity. In the bubble days, it came from the zip code. Venture guys wouldn't leave their zip code. They wouldn't even go over the bridge. Now they'll get on an airplane, because most of them own planes, and they'll do a day trip, right? And now they're transplanting and saying, okay, well, I'll go to China once every 6 weeks, or I'll go to India once every month. And so there's this round trip, and it's because they're going where the talent is, they're going where the market opportunities are, and the market opportunities are based on big populations, big opportunity, and then these regulatory regimes.
Yep.
So I just think it's the rise of others. I think more people are entering the economy, and the smartphone and connected devices are the driver. So it'll be a set of services and a set of devices, and the services will be based and located in places where people can know, trust, and understand the regulatory regime and the issues associated with that information. And so those are that's sort of the pattern that I'm seeing. So I think all good in Silicon Valley, also lots of good elsewhere in the world.
Okay, terrific. Unfortunately, there's a quick question at the back there. We've only got, yeah. Good question.
Sure. The question is about sort of software and the IT business. So I assume you're talking sort of about enterprise infrastructure in general. On your nodding yes. Okay. Well, here's basically the way I think things are going to evolve. You could, if you just look at, and I'll answer your question in a Microsoft-centric way because that's the way you phrased your question, but I think it applies in general in the industry. There's lots of server capability that exists inside of enterprise infrastructure. There's compute servers, there's database servers, there's directory servers, right? There's orchestration servers. For a while, there was this notion of lots of middleware stuff and things like that, right? So there's all these servers, mail servers, et cetera. Wherever there are servers, there will be services. So you can look at us and say, okay, look at Microsoft Server and Tools Business. And they're all licensed software that people own and operate in their data centers and other places, and resellers resell to small businesses, and they do things. There will be an attendant capability in our Azure Cloud Services architecture that provides those same capabilities. So the opportunity is kind of a bridging opportunity in the sense that if you go back to the beginning of computing, if you will, in the sense of mainframes as an architecture or mini computers as an instantiation of that architecture as well, before you got to client server, as I said earlier, sort of application data logic sits in one place and terminals look at it, then you split it and you get clients and servers. The Y2K build out. So people talk about the bubble period. There was obviously a consumer internet bubble, and Bill made points about regulatory issues and or others, John, about the way the markets worked, and there's certainly sand and grit in the market on that. But the real big thing in that period was the Y2K build out. Everybody was rushing to rectify and resolve these systems of record potential problems. And so that was the last chance that the IT industry had a chance to sell to enterprises. Enterprises are now buyers. They're not being sold to anymore. They're saying to industry, make this stuff work together. So they had to spend the early part of the 2000s wrapping up the systems that occurred both through consolidation, because big companies buy, grow, and integrate, and divest, and sell. And so they got all these disparate systems. They got all the stuff they got to make it work. So our approach was to build a programming model, because we do things from a programming model up, that allowed programmers to program in any language. So it wasn't just Java. We had a Java implementation. We resolved that with Sun. But C, Fortran, COBOL, so Visual Studio and the .NET framework lets all those programmers be first-class citizens, because they were the human resources in the enterprise that knew where the logic was on these old systems. So we now have 60+% independent assessment, primary tools usage, not only tool usage, but primary tools usage in the enterprise. So those people are now programming for the future. So what are they going to do? They're going to keep the data systems of record in place until it makes sense to move them, but they'll be driving new application logic into the cloud, maybe doing a little storage in the cloud, and they'll be making their way into that architecture. So I think it's a long but important migration process, and virtualization is the first step. So it's us and VMware doing the VM stuff at a low level, and then you'll have the systems management capability that lets it move to the cloud. So I actually believe, and I'll close in a second, very strongly that there's a massive opportunity in this enterprise infrastructure play as you get into cloud-based services. There's huge gaps, and the areas include everything from regulatory issues, whether it's compliance, financial services, high-performance compute problems. We got a little company with less than 10 engineers in it in France that's beating Oracle and SAP at supply chain optimization calculations using our cloud. They're taking point-of-sale register data from Carrefour times 4,000 outlets times all the shelf space SKUs, taking the back-end inventory systems, and then bursting up thousands of cores to optimize and get a view on where they need to touch their supply chain. I think you're going to see massive opportunity for a bunch of smart people to do these incredibly high-performant things as well as big data things. So high performance and big data become really important, and I think there's huge problems and opportunity to create transparency and visibility from the data that exists in all these systems that got built up over the last 10+ years. So long-winded answer, but